Welcome to W.R. Frady's Friday Night Frights. I'm your host, W.R. Frady, and I would like to welcome you back to the shadowy world of ghost stories, strange tales, and other spooky fun for the Halloween season, the campfire, or just whenever the spirit moves you. So, what is it about vampires, the vampire legend, that fascinates us? Is it by chance the immortality, the sexual representation, the immortality, the seemingly stoic power in which they rule their niche? Is it the Gothic castles? Is it the bats and wolves and the fantasy element that drives us? Or is it because they resemble perhaps a darker part of the human psyche? None can say, really. I believe that honestly, everyone has a fascination with vampires in their own way for their own reasons. Perhaps they connect with them. Perhaps they fantasize about being one of those ancient dark lords that have ruled not only historical and mythological, but also the literary masses. Tonight, we will delve into the world of vampires for a couple of stories. So, grab yourself something to drink, some hot cider perhaps, tea, maybe even a wine. Get some popcorn or your favorite snack. Pull up a chair and turn the lights down low. And let's tell some spooky stories. Or better yet, let's tell a couple of vampire tales. Our first tale tonight takes us to the dark Victorian Edwardian setting of the Whispery Township, where Shelley finds herself on the open streets in the middle of the night, beckoned, summoned by a compelling voice which she can neither understand nor resist. This is Dark Embrace. Shelley had no idea how she got out on the empty, lonely streets of Whispery Hollow. All she knew is that there was a clock bell tolling in the distance, and a breeze that would blow by her in gusts, sweeping leaves and debris by her like lost phantoms in the night. She knew not how she got there, nor could she figure out why she couldn't stop, but she kept feeling this compelling urge that was pulling her down the lonely roads to the street, to the center of town. Always toward the center of town. Somewhere a dog barked at her before running off, its hackles raised in fright. And she turned a corner and the breeze blew up and he caught her in the face. And no matter how much Shelley wanted to be back in her nice warm bed with the fireplace to crackle, pop, and soothe her with its warmth and its welcoming glow, back to sleep. Here she was, strolling toward the edge of town, or strolling toward the center of town, in her nightgown. The breeze blew it tightly about her, and she could feel the chill of the mid-autumn air nipping at her skin through the thin fabric of her garments, and the cold feel of the pebbles beneath her feet of the cobblestone roads. She rounded a corner that led her to the center of town. There, where the old fountain sat in the town, there seemed to be a solitary figure waiting for her. And she couldn't tell whether it was the rush of the fountain or the rush of the air hissing as as the wind blew through her, almost as if it was trying to warn her about where she was going and what she was doing. But even as she wanted to resist this compelling urge that beckoned her to the fountain, she found herself still drifting. And even as she came, she saw the solitary figure beckoning for her to approach. As she drew near, she realized it was Jacob Barkley, the enigmatic businessman that she had seen at the town dance merely weeks ago. It seemed he and her father had been talking during that time, and she was introduced to him then, and something about his presence, something about his aura made her wary of him, even though he dressed very, very, proudly and very articulately. And he spoke eloquently. There was just something about him that felt off, cold, perhaps unrelatable. But here she was, walking to him. In fact, he was welcoming her into his hand as these thoughts crossed her mind. But yet still, as much as she was drawn to him in that instant, she was also very much repulsed by him at the same time, as that odd vibe just still permeated her very being. And what would a lady like you be doing out at this time of night? Is it not late for a lady to be out by herself? Jacob asked in a deep, almost sepulchral tone in his voice. I don't know, she spoke. She's trying to find her voice, but very little of it was coming. And what is the matter? Why is it you tremble? He asked. It is cold. Cold, and perhaps a little bit afraid, he asked. Yes. Afraid, yes, she said, just trying to gather her thoughts and her senses. Every instinct in her was telling her to break free of this man and run. But she was held fast between his voice, his gaze, and this compelling pull that lulled her to him. And as he continued to speak with her, and he would lower his voice and soothe her. "It is all right, child," he said. "I know it is cold out, and you have nothing to fear unless it is you think that I am he who called you out here." And she looked at him both. "But did you?" He just giggled, almost mockingly, but at the same time soothingly, almost as if a spider lulling a fly into its web. "If I could do that," he said, "what else does that make me possibly capable of?" And with that, he reached and put his hand on her back and drew her closer to him. And she could not believe the strength at which he just pulled her to him, almost as if she was a child and she was powerless to even think of resisting. "And what else, again," he said, "do you think I might be able to do, if that were the case?" And he drew her close and leaned in as if he were going to kiss her. And as much as she was revolted by his actions, she also felt inclined and somewhat aroused as she wanted to return his intimacy, even as if to mock that intimate moment. His lips brushed hers and moved over to the side, exposing the side of her neck where her heart could be seen, the pulse, and could be seen as her heart beat and the blood raced through her system. And he began to gently kiss and touch and caress her, and then before her waking dream could pull her out of his control, she felt needle-like teeth scraping her neck, and then the indentured puncture, and with a squeal of both pain and almost ecstasy, he penetrated her throat with his teeth and drank intoxicatingly deep, but not enough to drain her, for he did not want to drain her, but just enough to slake his thirst. Oh no, he didn't want her to be just another person with whom he drained. He wanted Shelley to be his bride, to be his plaything. So he drank just enough to slake his thirst, and as she lay unconscious in his arms, he lifted her up and took her off back to her home. Moments later, as he laid her in her bed and tucked her in gently, stoked her fire and had it warmed, he went back over and he laid his hand on her forehead, stroking her hair while speaking softly, slowly. "Oh, don't worry, child. Tonight will be but a waking dream for you. But know this," he said with a solemn vow. "Your father has invited me to come any time I like. And while I will not drain you tonight, you will be mine, and you will be my bride. But for now, sleep your sleep, dream your dreams, but know that I will be coming for you. And with that, he tucked her in and stood up and approached the window, and with one last glance to her and to the fire and to the door, he raised the window just enough to slip through. And once he was as he got ready to pass through, a gust of wind come in and stirred a gossamer of sparks up from the fireplace, shooting them up through the chimney. And he stepped outside and, hanging on with but the toes of his boot and in his hand, closed the window back and then dropped into the shadows, where he disappeared into the night. Dark Embrace was originally written for and can be found on Midnight Syndicate's legionsofthenight.com website. It was my first publication as a writer, and while the story itself is much more in depth than what I was able to tell here, it is a vampire story that I would definitely love to explore more into, which the world of Whispery Hollow and the Lovelady Township is my gothic horror fantasy Catawba Valley, in which I have created and has become my hometown of horror and gothic happenings that I have had pretty much been writing since high school. The first Lovelady tale was actually The Long Walk Home, which takes place in the fantasy town of Lovelady, but Whispery Hollow has become the Lovelady Township has become the definitive name for that setting. Basically a gothic horror fantasy, Victorian, Edwardian, Catawba Valley, where the granite falls still exist, where the towns actually have some of their historical names, and it's an incredibly fun and a wonderful location with restless spirits and things that go bump in the nights and ghost trains and a lot more just great spooky fun that will add to the mix. But you can find Dark Embrace on the ebenstone-tower.com and on Midnight Syndicate's Legions of the Night in their featured authors page under W.R. Frady. Our next tale takes us from the Victorian Edwardian landscape of Whispery Hollow and brings us forward to a more modern day, where a small house sits on a hill just outside of a small village, where Margaret, Paul, and David awaken one night to find themselves beset by a most unique and terrifying visitor. This is a retelling of The Window from Scary Stories. Margaret and her brothers, Paul and David, lived in a small house on a hill just outside of the edge of town. And it had always been a peaceful place, and they had lived there for a couple of years and had never had any real issues or worries or troubles. Well, one night in the late summer, Margaret woke up from a restless sleep and was having difficulty trying to get back to sleep, so she found herself absent-mindedly looking out the window near the bed. Well, as she lay there, she noticed that down the hill a ways, there were a pair of greenish yellow lights that were moving around at toward the bottom of the hill. So she sat up in bed. She kind of looked and watched, and they would move up the hill a little ways, and then they would go back in, and then the lights would move up, and before long a shadowy figure emerged from the forest, which was also the source of those eerie yellow-green lights. And they started up the hill toward her house, and then veered off to another. And as it approached the yard, she began to get kind of worried. And she thought that maybe she should run for the door and go tell her brothers, but with the window and the door being right next to one another, she thought maybe if she moved, that whatever was out there would see her and come after her. Well, before long, the creature was making its way across the yard and then turned and went off out of sight. Now was her chance. Margaret got up and ran to the door. And just as she was about to open it, she turned to look outside the window and found herself staring face to face into the eyes of a hideous creature that was more like a walking corpse, and with a shrunken, leathery looking face, and its eyes were the green and yellow lights that she had been seeing as it looked and leered inside of the window at her. So frightened, she wanted to scream, but she was frozen and had lost her voice due to the fright. The creature wasted no time. It took its fist and shattered the window and forced the lock open and raised it up to come in, and it swiftly accosted her, and entangling its bony, decrepit fingers in her hair, pulled her head back, and then just reached down with foul breath and just sunk its teeth right into her throat, just below her ear. That broke her silent moment, and she let out a blood-curdling shriek. Her brothers just stormed into the room to find her laying on the floor, bleeding, while her accoster had made his way out the window and was tearing back down the hill. And so they went out the window in pursuit, and they chased the creature all the way down until it disappeared in the woods just before the graveyard. And they called the police, and the police and the ambulance had come, and they was bandaging up her throat and her neck, and the police took her statement. Now, the officer says, sounds like it was some drunken lunatic or somebody on drugs that had the notion they were a vampire and decided to come terrorize you folk. Yeah, people have been getting weird this time of year. It's just odd like that. And so time went on, and they didn't see the creature anymore. Paul and David wanted to actually move. They wanted to pick up and go somewhere where they would believe Margaret would be safer. But Margaret was adamant. She's like, look, this is a one-time thing. we probably will never hear from whatever or whoever that was again. It'll be fine. I don't want to be driven from my home by this thing. But Paul and David, being those protective brothers, really didn't like the idea, but to feel safer, they went and each got a handgun, so that if someone or something ever came and attacked their sister again, they'd be able to deal with it before she got hurt. And time passed, and things went on. Then just about the late autumn, as the trees were nearly bare and the cold winds were blowing, Margaret found herself stirred from her sleep in the middle of the night with the feeling of being watched. And as she opened her eyes, she found herself staring into the same face that had attacked her many months ago. And it was tapping on the window. And it was trying to get in. This time, however, Paul and David heard their sister's screams in time, and they burst into her room and saw the creature, and it took off and was running down the hill once more. And they tore out the door and after the creature, and just as it was about to disappear into the woods like it had done before, David aimed and took a quick shot, and it hit the creature in the leg, and it stumbled. And as it got back up, it scrambled up and scrambled over, and they were able to keep up and follow it. And it scrambled up and over the wall and into the graveyard. And the next morning, they went to the church, and they explained to the pastor what had been going on and what they had encountered and where it had gone. And the pastor was utterly amazed at what they were hearing. So together they all went to the graveyard. And when they went inside, the scene was a horror. And it was just a horrifying appearance. Coffins and memorials were shattered, corpses thrown around, tumbled aside. It was ramshackle, as if somebody had went in and completely ransacked the whole area, except for one lone coffin. And as they made their way through the wreckage to that one coffin and opened it up, there inside lay their sister's attacker, the telltale bullet still in his leg. Seeing what this was and what they had to do, they dealt with the corpse the only way they knew how when it come to getting rid of a vampire that was plaguing the village. They filled its mouth with garlic, doused the body with holy water, and chopped off the head. Then they ushered and picked the body up and ushered it to the crematorium, where they shoved it in there and fed it to the flames until naught was left but ash. And from that day on, the town was quiet and safe from vampires. However, Margaret, Paul, and David never saw the night the same again. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes our vampire stories for tonight's episode. Now, vampire stories, like ghosts, ghouls, and other creatures, come in all shapes, sizes, and hairiness, and also as well as other cultures. So vampires is definitely a topic we will revisit in seasons and episodes to come. I'd like to thank you for joining us for tonight's episode, and I hope to see you again next Friday for W.R. Frady's Friday Night Frights. We're counting down to Halloween. We've only got a couple of episodes left. I think 3 more episodes, maybe a double feature, but we'll see. Anyway, I hope you have a wonderful week ahead, and I will see you here next Friday for W.R. Frady's Friday Night Frights. Until then, good night, sweet dreams, and if you hear anything tapping, rapping, or scratching at your window, wanting to be let in, keep your curtains closed and do not invite it inside.